anyone like to give him a big hand?
Thank you all for coming. I'm not sure that I can add much. You've been sitting through this for an hour and a quarter. You must have concussion if you haven't. You're not moving towards it. So, and you will have a lot of questions. So perhaps it might be better. All right. Look, I'll just say a few words and then open it up to you because you've sat through all this, and planning is enough to drive anybody into the ground, particularly late at night. Look, I think there's been a clear outline of what the government's proposing, and I suspect a lot of you have been to other meetings around here. There's been 4 that I know of over the past few months, and I think a lot of you probably have been to those meetings, or some of you anyway, and you're full of information. I think what I can add is just the process that is possible now. What the government is really trying to get you to do is to play by their rules, right? I'm in this group, Charter 29. We're a group of old planners. I've decided to grow a beard before Christmas because a whole lot of them are growing beards. And then I had a look and see there's a thing called designer beards with people a quarter my age. So I think and we go to these meetings and we check out the process that the government runs, and they channel your comments into the kind of structures that they outline. And it constricts what you want to do and constricts the response that they give. They're not serious about their consultation progress. They might fiddle with it around the edges, and when you look at some of the earlier activity centre plans, they did fiddle a little bit with the boundaries, but they're not mucking around, right? That's what we have to understand. And I don't think there's anything wrong with going to their meetings. The more the merrier, but don't play by their rules. Don't be channeled into these one-on-one conversations. Outline what you think is important and go en masse. Go with your friends and make a fuss. Because if you don't have your voices heard, they will just put you aside and ignore everything you say, or they will make a few little changes and say, we listen to you. A much better way, and I'm not saying don't do it, I think it's important to do it, show up, but don't just play by their rules. Make a fuss. They don't like that. And this, after all, is a political process, right? There's an election coming up next year, and if you don't like what's being happened, do something about it and make your voice heard, right? This is still supposedly a democracy. We could have been fooled by that when we look at the way this has all happened. There are 14 major planning amendments that have been inflicted upon you and the rest of Victoria without advertising. Now, I worked in the planning department for 15 years in the 80s and the early 90s, and I spent 10 years in local government, and this sort of thing would never have happened. Big amendments like this with such a huge impact were always exhibited, right? They were put on exhibition and advertised, and people could make submissions, and there were independent reviews of them where evidence was presented, and the government finally made a decision in close consultation with residents, special interest groups and local government, and that didn't happen. These amendments were they turned up one day, right? And there are 6 major ones that are really affecting you, but if we look at the whole lot of them, there's 14. And what they do, not only is it totally autocratic and undemocratic the way these have been inflicted upon the state and this city and you as local residents, but what they do is take away your rights once they're in place, right? So the built form overlay, the higher rise area, and the catchment zone, housing choice and transport zone, it looks like they're both going to deny you third-party rights. Initially, it looked like the catchment zone was going to operate with third-party rights, but they're now putting around, they're not spreading it around, but they've prepared a secret amendment to what's known as Clause 57, which is standards for 4-storey and now 6-storey development. And it looks like in their draft, they're proposing to take away third-party rights. And as has been explained, it'll be a deemed to comply. That is a set of standards, and if the development meets those standards, the council has to approve it and you don't get a say and there's no appeal. And then outside those areas is the rest of the residential area, right? Right across Melbourne, the rest of the residential, the main residential zones. And those zones, those residential zones where formerly Res Code operated, there's a new lower set of standards to 3 storeys, and there are no third-party rights. So what's going to happen over time is that you'll just get a development going up next to you. You're probably not even going to be notified. You may be if the council decides to, and you will have no rights. It'll just happen. And of course, if you're within the housing choice and transfer, the 800 metre, or it's actually about a kilometre generally, if you really look at where it's taken from, you're probably not even going to know what's coming up next to you until a 6-storey development comes up. And too bad if you're in the main development, the built form overlay. Forget that. So this is what you're confronted with. Now, just to finish up, you know, play this by the government's rules. This has been the most unprecedented, undemocratic, autocratic imposition of a set of principles and practices that I can remember. Now, democracy doesn't mean anything unless it's properly applied. Democracy otherwise is just a word. It's an ideal. And some of you may have been listening to the ABC Boyer lectures, and you know, these lectures are all being presented about the way we got democracy. Isn't it wonderful that we gave women the right to vote much earlier than other countries, that we have preferential voting, we have compulsory voting, and there's this self-congratulatory approach to, isn't it wonderful we have a democracy? Democracy doesn't mean anything if these kinds of autocratic impositions are put on us, right? It only means something if it's applied, and it's being misapplied. Coming up to the upper house is another example of how the government is concentrating more power in the hands of the minister. There's a whole separate fast-tracking process now. I love that word, fast-tracking, which is really designed to get people out of third parties, us, out of the consideration, and councils, bypassing councils. And the government can't stand the idea that there's single dwelling covenants over significant parts of Melbourne. Because it wrecks their plan to have multi-unit development. So they had to get rid of that. So there's a clause specifically designed to do that. But fundamentally, these legislative changes are designed to give legislative backing to the loss of democracy and democratic decision-making that they've put through in the amendments. You can't have a series of amendments taking away rights and the Planning Act keeping them. So they're now making the Planning Act consistent with their autocratic amendments, and that's what this is all about. The Greens are an interesting case because, as Jane said, they supported the Liberal Party attempt to repeal the amendments, the 3 key amendments we've talked about tonight, and so they helped set up the Select Committee to review the whole process, and a lot of this information came out that it's not needed for housing, it's not the planning system that's at fault. All those factors came out, but then the Greens voted with the government to then put the amendments through. And they said, look, we'll put them through, but when we know that the legislation, the Planning and Environment Act, is going to be fundamentally rewritten, And that's when we will put our head above the parapet. That's when you will hear from us. And I cannot get a response from the Greens. And a lot of people have tried to get answers and they're not responding. So they said that they would address all these issues at the time when the legislation came up. Well, it's delivery time, right? Because the real issue is, do the Greens and do all parliamentarians and do parliamentarians who care for, or say they care for the environment, believe that an urban environment is worth protecting? It's not just about forests, it's about the environment, the livability, the way we live and our neighbourhoods. That's what most of us deal with every day of the week. And it's terribly important that that urban environment is not just thrown away. And now is the time when people have to really stand up in Parliament.
Yeah.